Hey, everybody. Just wanted to touch base with you a little bit about your early reading, the first bit of reading that you're doing for the course, chapters 1 and 3. There's a particular concept that is introduced in chapter 1 that talks about the method, which is the heuristic or the tool for discovery that we use as we learn how to analyze different sources. So when I'm talking about analyzing a source, the source that I'm referring to is whatever we're breaking down into its pieces. So our very first analysis is going to involve sources that are visual sources, like a painting or a print ad or a political cartoon, something that you can see. Um, Yes, so that would be considered a source, what it is that we are analyzing. So I wanted to look at, I'm going to go over to the chapter 1 notes that are in your module here. It says read chapter 1. This talks about analytical moves, which are ways to prepare you and your thinking for analysis. And then we move into that term that I said, heuristics, which is a tool or an aid to discovery. And what we're going to be using going forward is the method. And what the method does, it enables us to pull details out of our source and categorize them into patterns and contradictions. By categorizing them, we begin to understand relationships between details. And that's the goal of analysis, is how do we see the different parts that make up whatever source we're studying, and then once we get those parts, how do they interrelate? What is the relationship between each one of those parts? So the method helps us do that. So for example, if you see right here in the middle of the screen, it talks about the 4 different categories of the method. We have exact repetitions and strands, which would be the things that would be considered to be patterns. And then we have binaries and anomalies, and those are the things that would be considered contradictions, things that don't go together. It's real basic, actually, when you think about it. Things that go together and things that don't. And then there are different ways to look at each one of those details. So let's go back to this module. And in it, you will see the method presentation. Let's look at it. I designed this so that there would be good examples for you to understand how the method works. So, how to use the method. The method is just one way to analyze a source, but it's a great way to break the source into parts and interpret what argument is being presented. A key point that the chapter makes is that your interpretation is actually an argument. You look at a particular visual piece, and based on what you see in those details, the relationships between patterns and contradictions, you have an interpretation that you believe to be true. And you could explain it to people in a way that they would also follow your interpretation. That makes it an argument or persuasion. You're not going to be writing persuasion, but it's in essence an argument as you explain why you see something the way you do. Okay, so that's a little complicated the way it's described there, but that's described as an argument in your text as well. So looking at patterns first, repetition. So when we're talking about repetitions, you look for things that are exactly the same in how you view them. Okay, so you've got in this particular picture, which I think is a pretty good example, you've got a lot of these guys hanging around in the sky. Okay. You might go, well, there's exact repetition all over the place. There is, but not in the way you think. This guy does not look the same as this guy. So they are not repetition. Okay. It's literally what you see has to match identically. So these 2 guys down here, or these 2 guys, are repetition because they look exactly the same. Even though we know that's the same character, just further away from us, it doesn't look the same, so it doesn't count. So are these repetitions, now that we see that there are details, you can see plenty of repetitions if you find the individual details that match perfectly. Okay. Are they significant? Is there a reason there's repetition provided in that painting? Well, probably because that's sort of strange. We don't normally see guys just hanging out in the sky. There's a reason they chose to do that. Okay. So, because it's significant, now we have to understand why it matters. Is there a message in that? Um, you don't know. Can we ask the artist? Nope. So now what we do is we become the person that interprets that. We create the message that we see. And here's a key: your interpretation of what you see there and my interpretation of what I see there are different. Our life, or could be different, I should say, our life experiences are different. What forms our way of thinking, those life experiences have happened to us in different ways. I have had way more life experience than y'all have had. And so what I see in that picture is probably going to be different than you. Does that make you wrong or me wrong? No, you cannot be wrong in an interpretation. As long as you have evidence to back up your idea, I believe that says something about rich people, or it's a class structure. That's what I see. But you might see something else. You might see people who are depressed. They're all dressed in black. I don't know. That's the beauty of it, though. You're not wrong, and I'm not wrong. We just have to be able to explain our interpretations. Okay. Moving on. So that's the visual example. Then there's a textual example. What is a repetition if we're reading something? So in your second paper, you're going to do a literary analysis. So you're going to look at words. Here's an example. The woods are lovely, dark, and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. It's kind of an obvious one, but do you see some things that are identical? Well, yep, we have those last two phrases, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. This poet chose to repeat that phrase for whatever reason. You get to decide what that is. It's hard to do when this is just an excerpt. You don't see the whole poem. You would want to see the whole poem in order to make interpretations. But it's clear there's an exact repetition there, and it's clear that it's significant. It matters. Okay, let's look at the next one. Strands. Three things that are tied together through a common bond, I guess is how you would describe it. They're connected in some logical way. So here, elements that relate to one another, they must be made of three or more images or words that are connected by logic. So if we're looking here, what do we see that might be connected by logic? Well, first of all three of these people, four of these people have on pajamas. Okay. There's clearly, this is the evening. Okay. This is sort of a more obvious one when we're talking about strands, but they are dressed in such a way that would indicate it's night. Okay. That's a strand. May not be significant, but it may be significant. Then let's see. He's got a star. She's got what looks like tinsel. Um, the boxes seem to be in the shape of a tree. Well, those three things indicate to me it's something about Christmas, maybe. Okay. They don't have an actual tree, there's boxes instead, which is a message, right? So there are strands, there are things in there that, when put together in a logical way, they match up, they relate to one another. That's a strand. Textual example in the book, hopefully you saw the poem. That I forgot what it's called all of a sudden. Anyway, it's got, you'll see it in chapter 1. It's the poem about, well, there's children's games mentioned: jump rope, laughter, play, hopscotch. Those things are mentioned in different places in that poem, but they relate to one another in the logic of children's games. So there's a connection there. Binaries, things that oppose one another. Here's the thing to keep in mind, though. People automatically assume that oppositions are opposites. And that's not necessarily the case. So here, elements are organized in contrasts that reveal significant tensions in a source. It's a tension. Open, closed, global, local, public, private, fantasy, reality. Well, those sound like opposites. Mhm. And they might be. They certainly could be. But it doesn't have to be that way. When you look at this painting here, many might recognize that as Tatooine from Star Wars. You see some things that oppose each other. Okay. The yellow and the red sun, those, they're not opposites, but they clearly don't go directly together. They're in different phases or something's different about them. So they oppose one another. They're not identical. Lots of things in these colors that aren't opposites, but they don't um, blend perfectly in together. There's lines in between each one of those colors. So that would represent a binary, something that does not, that opposes each other. And then the last one is called an anomaly. Probably you've heard this phrase used before, but elements that are exceptions to the pattern, things that seem not to fit. So when you look at this particular image, you see a lot of, those could be trees. That's what I see anyway, is I see trees all going up and down. They all have similar color patterns. They're not exact repetitions because things are different. They don't look exactly the same. And then you've got this one over here that looks like it might be laying down or at least coming out at a different angle. That's an anomaly. It also doesn't have the same colors that these do. It doesn't fit. Usually there's a reason for that. Do I know exactly what was intended by that artist? Nope. No way for me to ask. All I can do is make suppositions on my own. I can infer what the meaning might be based on my own personal experiences. So that's an anomaly. So those are the four categories that when we look at different sources, you're going to be focusing on. You're going to look at repetition, strands, binaries, and anomalies in everything that we do. If you're looking at, thank you, if you're looking at a visual source like a painting, that applies. Those are the details that you categorize. If you're looking at a poem or a short story, you're still looking for those things. It's just that the detail, instead of a visual detail, is a word or phrase, something that's happening in that written piece. Okay. That pretty well covers the method, but it's really important that you understand how it works. Not understanding it can definitely put you in a bad situation because it's something you've got to use throughout the course. So hopefully that helps a little bit. Obviously the chapters do a really good job of going into detail about what the method is. There's examples throughout the chapter. Look at them, read through them, and then let me know if you have questions. You're going to see the method all the way through the course. So make sure you've got a good handle on that and let me know if you have any questions. Thanks, guys. Have a good one.